Good morning and welcome back. Today's reading is Charlotte Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper. That one's available in your app carry-in on page 547. And we're also going to talk about conclusions today. Okay, so let's start with the conclusions. Your papers are going to be due 8 days from now. So we talked briefly about what should go into your intros, as well as what goes into a body paragraph and how you use the text closely. And what I said about the body paragraphs is you really earn the chance for the big insight, for your big analysis of what you think's happening here. So the conclusion, you also earn your chance to give the insights there. Your conclusion is a chance for big picture stuff, for broadening the perspective into other possible issues or topics, to answer the question, what does this all mean? The so what answer there. What we're not going to do is what you may have learned in high school, which is restate your thesis, wrap it up with a summary of what you've just said, and close it out. To me, that's just a complete bore and a waste of time. There's no reason to waste any space in these type of papers just restating what you already said. So what we're going to do is actually go beyond that. And I think that a useful way to think of an essay is that it is an intellectual journey. And when you're on that journey, you know more at the end of it when you're writing that conclusion than you did at the start. So your thesis and your intro, whatever you wrote first, tend to be a little simplistic to your understanding by the time you're writing a conclusion. So on one hand, you're going to need to amend and transcend that thesis. And that's the biggest piece of advice I have for you in the conclusion, is to reevaluate it, amend it, look for holes in it, be totally transparent and open to your reader about those holes, and try to transcend it with a big picture meaning question. It often means going back and rewriting your intro. So this is the other big tip I have is go back and rewrite, go back and really change some of what you've already written, but in a draft, with your newfound knowledge and understanding that you gained over the course of writing that paper. It doesn't mean completely change your whole idea, your whole thesis, but it does mean fine tune it. Go back and see where you were, the weaker points, and improve them. We tend to really spend a long time clearing our throats and going on about Merriam-Webster's dictionary uses or gives the following definition for theme. It's like, no, don't go there. Don't go into long dictionary definitions at all. Definitely read the dictionary. Let them inform your definitions. And if you need a definition in your paper, go ahead and put it in your own words. But also think about how we don't want to clear our throats spending a whole paragraph on abstract sort of vagueness. We want to jump right into the story, accomplish what we talked about in the intro, and in the conclusion, we're not going to spend a lot of time just restating that. We're going to go into the deeper or more interesting parts of it that we can find. And again, it's always going to be textual analysis driving the insight. We're going to say, I see where she got that brilliant point. She got it from her close analysis of this quote that she gave us in context in the story, in her essay. Okay, there's your brief mention of conclusions, and we'll talk a little bit more about quotation format and some other elements of an analytical essay. Again, it's due on July 9th, which is not 8 days from today, but a week from today. Excuse me. Okay, on to Gilman. One of my favorite stories in this run of fiction that we're starting with here is Charlotte Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper. And I think it really illustrates one of the things we've been talking about, I've been talking about, hopefully you've been thinking about, and you've been writing about on the blogs. And that is the ways in which form can enhance theme. In this case, we've got a first-person narrator, a woman, who has had a child and is recuperating from it, if you can call it that. She is staying in an old mansion, old sort of estate grounds, somewhat abandoned, a nice haunted house type Gothic landscape, except for it's very well lit, right? The overwhelming color here is yellow. The room is yellow, the walls are yellow, it's a hot yellow sun outside. But other than that, it's not particularly Gothic, it's more like The Lottery, in that it's sunny, it's does not look particularly dark or evil or haunted. Maybe as we read on, it starts to feel more haunted, and if not dark in terms of color, it becomes more dark in terms of association and being somehow sinister. So I would say this is a Gothic story. This fits in with our Gothic stories. Before we go any farther on what she's up to in this, she's up to a lot. Let's talk about Charlotte Gilman. She was an advocate for women. She actually did have a very difficult pregnancy and postpartum depression, in which she ended up leaving her child with her husband and allowing him to remarry because she said she was not a fit mother, and she wanted to continue being a writer and advocate. She was a major advocate for women's issues, and also mental health issues, and she advocated the differentiation of mental illnesses and other problems into classifications and categories so they could be treated independently and not grouped under things like women's hysteria, which is how sort of women's mental issues were written off then and uncategorized. She had some stands that were not so, well, at least to me, were not so noble. She was anti-Asian. She thought there was an Asian immigrant influx. It was called the Yellow Tide, and she, interestingly, yellow again, and she fought against it. So one of the footnotes to her career was that was a main part of it as well. I don't think that, some of these writers we read, Hemingway included, had some foibles in their personal lives. Sometimes they were racist or sexist, or often it was 100 years ago, so we can perhaps make some allowances. But there's some problems with the biographies of some of these writers, and it's up to you how much you care about that, how much you look at it. I tend to not care too much. I'm interested in the biographies, but to me it doesn't dictate my response to what they wrote. And so it's up to you how much you bring in biography, how much you care. I like to look at the text. To me, the text is what I care about most, and I like to see what it does. I honestly don't even care what the writer intended. It's interesting to see what they were trying to do and see how well they did it. But part of literature is learning that who cares what they meant? What matters is what the reader gets out of it and what they can draw out of it. Ideally, in a serious, scholarly way, using the text in order to make their points persuasively to other readers. To me, the text is what's important here. So, getting back away from biography to the text, one of the things I want you to look at here is how form enhances theme and how she writes this story. And the narrator sort of evolves on the basis of how the story is written. So if you look to the first page on 547, you'll see a writing style that's fairly calm and well thought out. They're very short paragraphs. We have some very honestly, there are a lot of one sentence paragraphs, which we'll see seems a little odd, a little bit disjointed. And we get some pretty mild punctuation, some mild-mannered punctuation. Who are our mild-mannered punctuation marks? They are things like periods, commas, the occasional semicolon, a dash. And one of the ways to look at punctuation is how long is the break that the punctuation gives you. A comma would be a very short break. A period, a somewhat longer break. Exclamation points and question marks seems to be long breaks with a lot of emphasis in them. A lot of, it makes it choppier the more you have. It makes it seem a little hysterical the more you have exclamation points, especially. When you're writing, note that an exclamation point makes you sound frantic, like you're a little bit off your rocker. And we're going to see that here. So we have a narrator who is descending into madness. We have a narrator who is in postpartum depression, which is the very common depression, various forms of depression that women who have just given a baby or not so recently, even months or years before, fall into. And now it's treated with psychotropic drugs and depression drugs. But for a long time it was not treated. It was sort of written off as women's problems, women's hysteria. And you see here, she's got some serious depression and it's not being treated. She's being shut up in a room. In fact, she's being locked into a room. And we can see her mental state descend through the structure of the paragraphs and the use of punctuation. So that's the ultimate elements of form here that Gilman is using to show this narrator's slow fall into madness. She starts with a sort of postpartum depression. She's locked into this room. She begins to hallucinate. By the end of the story, we can see something closer to psychosis. Though I would argue she goes through a lot of other mental states as well that we now have names for. At the time, we would not necessarily have had classifications and categories for each one of these names, from bipolar disorder to psychosis, etc., sociopathy. So we do have these names now, and we're using them more. And I think she is trying to show us this woman's descent into these various problems and how she's not getting any treatment for it. She's being belittled. She's being infantilized by her father, there's my slip, husband, who's acting like a sort of doctor, father, jailer for her here. And of course, for Charlotte Gilman, gender was a big issue, and this whole infantilization and writing off of women's mental illnesses and postpartum depression as, silly, small topics, that's obviously something that she's fighting against here and wants them to be taken more seriously and treated like any other illness, disease. So I think as she is looking into patriarchy and mental illness, she's also looking into sort of sexism and patriarchy and how women are treated differently from men. So this John becomes a sort of archetype. An archetype is a figure meant to represent a whole issue or topic. In this case, he is the patriarchy. I mean, this guy is the sort of male power structure that controls everything from medicine to industry at the time. Okay. I think that wraps up most of the things I wanted you to look for. I do want to ask also, how much of this is real? What do we make of this room? This room with little hooks on the walls, with the bed bolted down to the ground, with bars over the windows. Is this a former children's playroom that's turned into a bedroom? Or is this something else, like an insane asylum, a cell of some kind, where people have been locked up for a long time? Are we really just a little old ancestral mansion, or is this something different? Was this used as something like an asylum, where other people confined here? So this is a confinement narrative, and I think it's interesting to look at it that way. The same way that Orange is the New Black is a confinement narrative, as are many, even Poe. It's a dark confinement narrative. His confinement doesn't last that long, but Fortunato is certainly confined in the Cask of Amontillado, as is our narrator here in Gilman. So we have a lot of balls up in the air here. This is a little longer. It's more sophisticated, more complicated, and I'd like to hear what you get out of it. There's a lot of different issues to post about, from her stylistic issues. Look at those ending paragraphs and how they become very disjointed. They use a lot of exclamation points and other frantic punctuation marks. They're short, and they seem to be losing the rationality that she had at the start. So let's note this change and all the different balls that she has in the air going forward. Gender, mental illness, everything else we've talked about. So I'll see you on the blogs, and our next reading is William Faulkner. Sure you've heard of him. This one's one of his short stories called A Rose for Emily, and we'll be dealing with mental illness of another sort in that story. I'll be in the office in Morton 103A, but also email me or call me, and we'll see you on the blogs. Have a great Wednesday. One more reading before the 4th of July holiday, and then we will really begin our focus on the essay due on July 9th. Excuse me. All right, thanks a lot. Have a good day.